started working at Channel 5 in 2003, and around that time, as a part-time employee there, they thought I'd try finally to start writing a book, something I always wanted to do. I knew at a young age I wanted to be a writer, and things were working out in the broadcast career, and there's a lot of writing involved in that, but it wasn't the long form that I had a lot of respect for people who could write a book, and I said, well, let's see if I can do something like that. So I wrote a book called Destiny Derailed about the 2003 Red Sox, which I took to really just be a writing assignment for myself to see if I could be disciplined enough to follow through on a project, and I did, and self-published it, not a big deal, but it gave me some confidence to move forward with a real project. And so I was sitting at my computer at Channel 5, just thinking about what topic I would want to write about, and nothing was really coming to me, so I called a literary agent who worked in Boston. His name was Esmond Harmsworth. I always thought it was a very good name. And I met with Esmond and told him I wanted to write something about sports, and he said that the publishing companies were looking for the next Friday Night Lights. They kind of like that small town feel with a passion for sport. And I thought immediately about junior hockey in Canada, something along those lines. Well, I can't just pick up and move to Canada and try to write a book, so what can I do in Massachusetts? And that led me to the idea about boxing. And I'd always been a boxing fan. I watched all the Olympics and Tuesday night fights on USA. And I'm sure that I had seen Micky Ward fight in my life, but I didn't really know it at the time. So I didn't know Micky Ward's name that well, but it had certainly crossed my path. And so when I started to try to think about a book I wanted to write, I looked up Micky Ward on the internet and saw that there was a story there that was a little bit more than just about a boxer. His brother, Dickie Eklund, was a part of the story. The city of Lowell would be a part of the story, and I saw all of that almost immediately within about 5 minutes. And so then I figured, well, how do you reach Micky Ward? So I got back on the internet and looked up boxing gym, Lowell, and sent me to the West End gym, Romalo's gym, and I said, the guy who picked up the phone, I said, I'm trying to reach Micky Ward. And he said, you got a pen? Here's his number. I said, okay, here we go. So I put up that phone conversation, and I called Micky's number, and he picked up. And I said, I'm Bob Halloran from Channel 5, and I was wondering if I could write your biography. And he goes, yeah, sure. Okay, so I had the idea for 10 minutes, and now I'm committed to writing a book. And, so I met Micky for the first time in August of 2005 at a parking lot outside Gold's Gym, which I guess is somewhere near here. I'm a little lost in directions and stuff, but we sat on a curb together and talked about how the process would work and what I needed from him, and names of his family and friends and managers and contacts and promoters and all the rest of that stuff. And I said, basically, you know, I'm going to go do some research, and then I'm going to leave you for 3 or 4 or 5 months and come back to you more intelligent about your career and be able to ask you better questions and things. So between August and October, that's what I did. And between October and December, January, I talked to Micky extensively, many times over the phone, several times in person, really just to kind of weed out what the part of the story is that I was looking for, because I didn't want to write a book that was simply, you know, he was born, he fought, he retired at the end. I was looking for different layers of stories that I could kind of pursue, and I needed to know more about Dickie and his mom as a promoter, and you know, there's a maelstrom of activity going on throughout his childhood, and I wanted to, with a, you know, an amateur psychology approach, how Micky became who he was. The fact that there was always such turbulence in his life. I used to say that he lived in kind of the eye of a hurricane, and in his mind and in his work, he was calm and he was focused, and then all around him was just craziness. And I couldn't understand how somebody comes out of that with the values and the morals and the discipline, the honesty, the loyalty, all the things that I characterize or attribute to Micky as his character. I was like, well, where did you get that? You didn't get it from your dad, you didn't get it from your mom, you didn't get it from your brothers or your sisters or anything. I mean, you didn't get it from anywhere but somewhere inside. So I tried to pursue that as much as possible as we were going about it. And one thing that I always remember when I met with Micky the first time, he said, you know, you can write my biography, but you have to check with Paramount first because I sold my life rights to the movie studio, and I want to make sure that it's okay. So I said, all right, I can't imagine they'll have a problem with it. So I called the Paramount, and there was an attorney that I was supposed to reach there, and I called that son of a gun every day for 30 days, and he never took my call. And I know that I'm not an important somebody or anything, but I would have thought he would have picked up the phone at some point and said, would you stop harassing me? But I called my agent. I have an agent for television. And I said, can you talk to this guy? Boom, 5 minutes later. So lawyers talk to lawyers apparently, but they won't talk to me. And I was told, yeah, you can go ahead and write the book, but kind of stay out of their way. So I don't even know what they're doing. Right now, they don't have a screenwriter, they don't have an actor, because they went through that whole Matt Damon, Brad Pitt thing, and before Mark Wahlberg was this, and so they were all over the place. I said, yeah, I'll just do my own thing. Because the irony of that is that I went home and I told my wife, I said, you know, they're making a movie about it too, so if I get the book out and then the movie comes out and then everybody likes the movie, and so I just got to beat the movie. I got to get the book out before the movie. So the book came out in 2007. I beat that movie by 3 years. So it's like, I just kept waiting for it to happen. So when the book came out in 2007, it had a nice little run, you know, especially, I think if it sold 10,000 books, 9,900 of them were sold here in Lowell. I mean, everybody seems to love Micky and want to know about it. And so, you know, there was general and passionate interest here. But then when the movie came out, there was a little bit more national knowledge of who Micky was, and so there was a second life to the book at that point. And what I mentioned before is that the movie people who wanted me to stay out of their way, when the book came out in 2007, they hired a screenwriter sometime in 2008 named Scott Silver, who's local in some respect. I can't remember exactly where he's from, but he interned at like Channel 7 way back when. Moved out to California, and he wrote 8 Mile with Eminem, and so he was assigned to this, and he gave me a call. I had no idea how he got my number either. I was like, I picked up for him though, and he asked me if he could use the book, use my notes, use my research, and use me as an interview subject as he started to put the screenplay together. And I said, sure, that's great. And he goes, oh, and Paramount will pay you for that. Even better. I was like, up until then, I was happy to be involved, and they paid pretty well. You know, I really didn't do that much. I sent them. My process is to do a lot of research and then throw information that's targeted or focused on one thing into a Microsoft Word document. So, if Arturo Gatti fight 1, boom, everything I want is in that one. 2, childhood. Richie Bryan interview, Mickey O'Keefe interview, they all go in their own little spots. And so then I would, so I sent all of those things via email to this writer, Scott Silver, and then he interviewed me for, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 hours total in a couple of different conversations. And it was very interesting to kind of observe how he went about his business because it was very different than mine. He wanted to know what Salinano was wearing when I met with him, what his office looked like, you know, does he have big stubby fingers, how would you describe him? And so he was trying to create a character in his mind based on the actual person and then work from there. He wasn't asking me, what did Sal say? You know, he was fine, I think, with the idea that he would create his own dialogue for everybody based on the story that he was trying to tell. He wanted to know more details that he didn't have time to do on his own. He couldn't come meet Sal at that point, things like that. So in any event, when I started writing the book, there was an awful lot to start with. And one of the first things I remember is that Micky said I should meet Cleo Supernon, the Highland Tap. And so I called Cleo, and he said, yeah, why don't you come by around 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and we can talk and when I get the place open. And I thought, well, Highland Tap to me sounds like a bar. So maybe it's a breakfast place. I don't know, because it just seemed 8 o'clock in the morning, really? So I showed up at 8 o'clock in the morning and the bar was open and people were drinking. And I was like, holy crap, I didn't know that this was even legal. I really didn't. So am I in a speakeasy or something?
Yeah.
And that's where I met Manny Freitas, just happened to meet him. How many people, by the way, have read the book so far or anything? You gonna start reading it now? And so Manny Freitas is a boxer as well. His picture's on the wall of the Island Tap, and I just started chatting with him. He's telling me stories about fights in prison and fights in the ring and his record and things. And so there's a real kind of character that comes from Lowell, that lives in this world inside Lowell, that I started to meet over time. And when I first started writing the book, there is an insecurity as to whether or not you're the right person to write a book about a subject you know nothing about when you start. And then there's a part of me that thinks, no, I'm exactly the right person to write it because I don't know anything, and so I'm coming at it with fresh eyes. And so there may be some pieces missing or some common knowledge that I'm not aware of, but I'm also more likely to ask additional questions and have a perception on this that only an outsider might have. So I moved forward on that, and clearly it was very helpful. I think throughout the entire time, basically I gave myself an assignment to finish the book by July. I told you I met in August. I was done with the research by early January, and then I gave myself 6 months to write. And I was done by July 1st, which was the target date. And then I sent out 137,000 word manuscript to 20 some odd publishers, either through query letter or attachment and things. And I got 19 rejections. Some of them came within seconds, absolutely seconds. I would send the email out, and as I started to write the next email to the next publisher, I would get an inbox notification, and I was rejected. Okay. Thanks for giving it a chance. And but finally one publisher was at least interested enough to kind of pursue it, and so as I mentioned, I was done with it in July, but then I wasn't really done with it until the following January or February, because the editing process was taking some time, and they lopped out about 30,000 words. I always took out the tangents that I thought were kind of interesting, you know, like you won't see this in the book because they took it out, but Micky fought a guy out in California who was trained by a blind trainer. And I did some research on the trainer, and it turned out that he was in a fight, and the guy who was fighting put some like acid type stuff on the gloves and kept hitting him to the point where he went blind. And then the trainer got depressed and lived basically in his closet for about 9 years until his kids built a gym in a boxing ring in the backyard, and that got him out of the house to start training the neighborhood kids. And he would train the kids by having his hands on their shoulders, and you could tell by the way they were throwing a punch, if it was proper, and their footwork, and how it sounded when it hit the bag. And I thought all this stuff was kind of cool. It only took me like a page and a half to tell that. Boom, that's out of the book. So I was like, all right, so they don't like tangents. So this is the first real book I'm writing, so I'm kind of learning from the editor as to what is appropriate for a book and not. There were many different, so when the book was done by January, February the following year, then it took a long time for them to kind of just roll it out and release it. So it didn't come out until November of 2007. So when you talk about writing, I mentioned movies, the average time from the genesis of an idea and the purchase of a project to the time when the movie is actually released, the average is 7 years. Well, this book was over 2 years, and it's not like it's a real moneymaker. These things are done more for passion, for love, for challenge. That's primarily the reason I started writing the book, was to challenge myself to do something really difficult. And so there is a high degree of pride when the book comes to the house for the first time. You open it up, and there it is, and you go, all right, I did something. Then the work begins, because you're not just a writer. Now you're the promoter, the marketer, and it's a lot of self-promotion. Hey, look at me. Come out and hear me talk and stuff. And it's a strange reality at this level. I'm sure J.K. Rowling doesn't have to worry about it, or Grisham or something like that. But that you can't just be a writer, you actually have to be a public speaker. And I feel that there's an advantage to what I do for a living as a TV broadcaster, where I can come out and have conversations with people, and I'm relatively comfortable here. You guys aren't too intimidating, so that made me too nervous yet. But there's an awful lot to writing a book that you wouldn't necessarily foresee when you get started. But the quiet solitude, research, reading, sitting down for an hour and a half or 2 hours and writing a paragraph that you're in love with, and you think, well, that's a great paragraph. What time is it? Oh my God, it's 4 o'clock. And other days when you sit down and you write 2,000 words in 30 minutes, and that happens too, and it works out beautifully. So you never know which day is going to arrive. But I said earlier, I spoke at the high school today, talked to a broadcast class there, that when I'm writing, I'm pretty much writing 24/7. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning. It's frustrating when I come up with something great at that moment, and then I take a shower and now I don't remember it. And so but I'm writing while I'm in the car, when I'm watching my daughter's swim practice. I'm constantly thinking about it and trying to work it out. And it's a very successful process in small increments, because you can't just think about the book in your mind because it's too big, but you can think about small increments, and then you can master those and hope that they then connect to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and that you have this thread that kind of starts and moves along properly. I look back on the project, and I'm very pleased to have met Micky. I'm also intrigued by some of the other people I met and different things that occurred. But ultimately, I'm proud of the book. I think if I had another shot at it, I might write it slightly differently. It might be better. I do think that each of the books I've written has gotten slightly better. Not necessarily the story each time. Micky's story is great, but my ability to tell it in a way that's not too pretentious. I'm writing my first book. I'm supposed to be really smart. So I've got to find a big vocabulary word, thesaurus.com or something. And I got to impress the reader with my research. That's probably why I wrote 30,000 words too many. And then over time, there's a confidence level that you reach, and you just trust yourself. And I think I'm getting better at this. So, so you guys are reading the first one. So hopefully, if you bother to read the next and stuff, you'll see some of that gradual process and everything. It is an interesting thing. I'm almost at that point now where you read other authors, like John Grisham I mentioned. I think A Time to Kill was his first, and it wasn't that good. And then he came out with The Firm, and that was great, and he started to find his voice and things. And then you go back and you read The Firm, and okay, that was a beginner. They turned into, Time to Kill. They turned into a very good movie and everything, but it was different. And so there is a development. I mean, the first time you write a book, what do you know about writing a book? I knew I could write, and I knew I could do the work. I knew I had discipline and things like that. But boy, to be able to put it on the page over a 6-month period, sort of like, running a marathon. You take the first step and you don't know if you're actually going to finish. And so when I did that, it felt good. Does anybody have any questions?
What was your background role in the movie?
Oh.
Did it?
No,
really focus on you to move the movie along?
The question is, what was my background role in the movie? And it really was just as they called me, when the movie ends and the credits start to roll. You've all seen the movie, I'm sure. And off on the left-hand side of the screen, the actors' names are going: Mark Wahlberg, Christian Bale, all that kind of stuff. And then, as the picture squeezes, the credits roll, and it says technical consultants. And there was Sal Anano, and I think Lou DiBella, and Bob Halloran, right there. And when I went to see the premiere, I had my camera in my lap the whole movie and stuff, and as soon as I saw my name come up, so I actually got a decent photo of it and Facebooked it. So my role really was a bit of what I was explaining, is that all I did was offer my research and my notes, and I can't say that I noticed anything in the movie that was specific to my book. The movie told the story. I always felt like it told what I say is the essence of the truth, because factually it was kind of all over the place in terms of absolute truth and facts. Some of it bothered me, and some of it I completely understood. Like, you know, I've said before that Dickie Eklund comes across as, you know, even though we know he's doing crack and stuff, Christian Bale is so engaging, and the character had so many, you know, funny and interesting moments that he comes off as kind of an incorrigible drunk. Oh, that Dickie, you know? And I felt like in real life, there was a lot more darkness than that, and that the movie made a conscious choice not to put a gun in Dickie's hand before he went to jail. We know he was arrested and charged and found guilty of armed robbery and kidnapping. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, 4 of which he served, and the movie puts him in jail for about 8 months. And I figured, okay, you got to do that because the son is the same age when you get out as when you went in. And so that's movie storytelling and things like that. But overall, I thought they did a wonderful job of condensing, you know, a lifetime of stuff into a very short amount of time, 90 minutes. And I was very impressed with that. But I said earlier today that when I walked out of the theater, I wasn't convinced that they made Micky Ward and Mark Wahlberg's character out to be the hero that he is. You know, I think you root for him and you're happy and he gets his championship belt and things like that. But again, I think because Christian Bale stole the show, that you might have lost a little bit of how the heck did Micky, you know, deal with all this and get where he is. And so that's why when I look back at the book, I keep wondering, was I able to do that? Was I able to knock the reader over the head with the truth that this is a really remarkable man and a remarkable story and an improbable end to really, there were 99 ways that he could have tripped and fallen and failed. And there was only one way that he could have succeeded, and that's the one thing that happened. And I'm not sure that the movie was good on that, and I'm not sure that I was perfect on that. So now I'm out telling everybody in the world, one person at a time, that Micky's pretty great. They paid me fairly well, basically to talk on the phone for 4 hours and to send out a few emails. So I was like, all right, that's pretty cool. So, did better at that than I did with the book. Yeah.
So during the editing process, were there any parts that you fought to keep in that they were trying to get rid of? And looking back, would you still fight to keep those in?
That's a good question, because I told my recent editor for Impact Statement, you know, I really put myself in the editor's hands. I think that they've edited, you know, dozens or more books. And I try not to get married to what I've written, like, you know, oh wait, no, this is you know, biblical, this is awesome, you can't touch it. And instead I sort of say, okay, what you think is right is right. So if I put myself back in time, no, I don't think that I would have fought for anything. I think that some of those elements that I liked are fine being absent from the book. They don't usually mess with my writing style. It's really just, you know, the stories that I'm telling, they take them out or something like that. They also changed everything to past tense when I was writing in present tense when the fights, because in sports television, I give highlights in present tense. It gives an immediacy to everything. But this happened years ago, so it needs to be in the past tense for the book. Okay, so that was something that they changed. But further answer to your question, doing an impact statement, maybe it's because of my confidence now. Maybe it was just a level of passion for a portion, but I did fight for things in this one. very quickly on impact statement that Debbie Davis was one of the victims of Whitey Bulger and Steve Flemmi. This is Steve Davis sitting in the front seat. He's coming out because he wants to see how book tours go because we're going to be doing this soon. And when I told the story of how Flemmi told the story, his account of how Debbie was killed, I interspersed some quotes in italics from Steve and his sister and his mother and his brother and things like that. And it broke up the story, but it put some, I thought, kind of intenseness to the whole thing and reminded the reader that as Flemmi's telling this story so casually, there were real people involved here and they were really hurt by it. And the editor took it out. And I said, I'd really like to put that back in. So it did get back in. But the funny thing about just the writing process is that everything that I've done anyway, I don't know how other people operate, but I do it in the Microsoft Word document and I send it. Now there's a track changes thing when you do Microsoft Word things, and so when they make a change, whether they take out a word or a comma or they change a sentence or something like that, there's a red line that goes all the way to the right-hand margin and a description of what just happened, a deleted comma. But you do that 17 times on a page, and it just looks like you failed your midterm. It's like it's blood red. So, oh my God. And then when I say yes or no to something, my work ends up in blue. So I get a blue line that goes across. So now I send back this thing, it's just this hodgepodge of like, it's a conversation, it's edits, and the whole bit. But I have to approve each of the things that my editor changes. And if I don't approve it, I write a comment. And so that's how I went about it, telling her, I do want this. And the other thing that she did to me in this version too was that I was trying to write it as kind of a nonfiction novelist as opposed to a journalist. And so I was injecting my own thoughts in different places. I was engaged in some kind of storytelling that a newspaper writer wouldn't do. You know, a newspaper writer is just a facts man kind of an approach, and I wanted to have a little bit more entertainment value to it. And so a couple of times she kind of caught me in that regard and criticized it, and I said, that's what I'm doing. And so we did have a little bit of a tussle over that, but it was an email tussle, so nobody got hurt. But yeah, the editing process is something that you sort of have to give up a part of yourself and just put your hands in somebody else and trust them, and that's what I've done so far. Question?
What turns you on about the whole process? Do you like the research? Do you like the writing?
He's asking if I like the research or the writing in terms of the process, and I do like the writing, but I have nothing to write until I've done the research. And when you are told in school or something that you have to know everything about World War I and the names and the dates, it can be a little difficult to study that. When you have a passion for something, whether it's real or you've just created this new passion, because I can't say I had a passion for Micky Ward's life until I decided I was going to write a book. Boom, now I've got that passion. Then the research is easy, you know. My daughter was 6 years old at the time, and I ordered all of Micky Ward's fights from bloodsweatandtears.com. And I'm sure it was illegal because when he sent me a DVD, a couple of DVDs of all the different fights, and you could tell that this guy had just recorded the fight off ESPN or something like that, HBO, because back in the day of VHS tapes, there'd be that wrinkle and that crease. And so on my DVD, I'm seeing the VCR wrinkle. And so he just recorded and mailed it across state lines. But I got 27 of Micky's 51 fights for like $39 or whatever it was. It was like cheap, and I was like, cool, this is great. But part of my research for the book was to watch 27 fights. And so my daughter would come into the room. I said, you want to watch men hitting each other? And so we would just we watched boxing for a long time. And I would type, and I had my computer on my lap, and I would describe the rounds. I would listen for what they were saying between rounds, because television was providing that. So the book has like a lot of detail in it that I had no right having because I wasn't at the fights and things. but television gave it to me. I knew what the announcers were saying, what their analysis was. I knew what Micky or somebody else was saying in his corner, and it really brought to life those fights that I otherwise wouldn't have known about and would have only trusted newspaper accounts on. So that's why I do tell people who haven't read Irish Thunder yet that I think that the first half of the book is a pretty compelling story about growing up in Lowell and dealing with a lot of different things, and Micky's first venture into boxing, and then his comeback. When I get to his comeback, it becomes a boxing book. There's a lot of fights being described and how the fights were made and what the money was and things like that, negotiations. So hopefully, if anybody reads the book, they like boxing, because at some point that's what it becomes. Which I thought the movie did a nice job of avoiding to some extent. You know, they showed some boxing scenes, obviously, but that was a movie about a dysfunctional family, and I think that they did a good job of making it universally appealing, and I think my book has a universal appeal through a big portion of it, but then at some point it becomes a sports book, which is okay too. Yes?
In the book, you talk, in the boxing section, there was a lot about the boxing promoters that I had never even known about, and that whole world there of some less than above board dealings and things like that. So how much of that did you know before you went in? Like, you know, you said earlier today that you were a boxing fan, but the promotional side of it, that must have been a pretty eye-opening experience.
Absolutely, and I'm trying to remember the name of the promoter who gave me the most of the information. He's over in Revere, and if I could remember it right now, I'd tell you. But in any event, he was the first to open my eyes to the underhanded dealings of promoters, because what was underhanded about it, and Micky was burned by it, especially late in his career, but early on, you get a promoter who says to his boxer, you know, you're going to fight so-and-so. And the kid says, well, I want at least like $10,000 for that. And the promoter says, okay. And then he goes and makes like a $100,000 fight. The fighter kind of asked for an amount without knowing how much money is in the fight. So even in, if I'm remembering the details properly, I think it was Micky's second fight with Arturo Gatti, he said, I want $1 million for this. And so Lou DiBella and Salinano and all the others that were working for HBO at the time said, okay, fine, we'll get you $1 million. And then I think the fight turned out to be like 3.6. So if he had just said, I want half the purse, or I want 60%, or whatever, he would have done a little better for himself. But he loved the idea of making $1 million, and he said, look, when he first saw the check, he had like Mr. Magoo eyes, and it's like, so I don't feel like he got burned there terribly or anything. But the promoters, you know, they need the fighters, but they don't need the fighters to know everything about what's going on. And so that was an aspect that you always hear about, you know, Don King or something like that, and mistreatment, and but usually that's in the $1 million range with the world championship fighters and stuff. But small-time promotions is where small-time promoters are making some decent money by taking a larger share, as opposed to having a contract that says, when we find out the fight's got $20,000 in it, you get 50% of the purse, and I get 15 or 20% of your purse, or something like that. That's the way it works with agents. But in boxing, you know, you got these kids who start off at 16 years old or less, and by the time they're well into it, deals have already been struck, and they're kind of behind the 8 ball at that point. But that was an interesting thing that, you know, I'm trying to think of his name right now. Like I say, I wrote the book in 2005 and 6, so it's been a long time. But that book in particular, I read at least 7 times, running through with the editor and stuff like that, just looking for typos and editing things out and throwing things in. And every single time I read it, it was like in 2 days, because they give you like a week to get it back to them, and then they have a week. And so I was trying to rush it along, but that didn't help. It came out in November. Yes?
I was taken by the contrast between the first time you published it and then the bump that you got from the movie. said the first time you published it in 2007, and
Yep.
most of the distribution was right here in Lowell, which I found interesting. And that's a lot of books, I think, to be sold right here in Lowell. But can you give us an indication by order of magnitude of the bump that you felt from the national exposure, or was some of the interest internationally even, that kind of thing?
I'm gonna step right over here for a second. So,
Italy.
again, props. When Irish Thunder came out, the cover looked like this. And then when the movie came out, there was a new cover that is on the paperback, that the first couple of copies, I think I have one at home, had a little sticker on it, not an actual sticker with an adhesive to it, but kind of a star added to it that said, now the focus of a major motion picture starring Mark Wahlberg and Christian Bale. And we were trying to ride the movie thing and let people know that even though it's called Irish Thunder, when you're walking past the bookstore and the bins at BJ's or something like that, you'll know this is the book that helped write The Fighter. And Paramount called the publisher and said, cut that out. I don't know what right Paramount had to say that, but my publisher caved in 2 seconds. And so we didn't get to do that. But look at this cover, can you see that? This is The Fighter with Mark Wahlberg's picture and my name right there, and it's called The Fighter. And this is all in Italian. This is how they published the book in Italy. But if they had done that in America, changed the title and put Wahlberg's picture, I think I would have sold a little bit better. But no, the answer to your question is that, I told this to Steve, every 6 months, now the book came out in November, so 6 months after it comes out, sometime, what is that, April, the publisher sends me a packet of paper with information and numbers on it. It says domestic sales, and foreign sales, and Kindle, and ebook, and returns, and damage, and all this. It's just line after line, and there's numbers off to this. I have never understood them, and ultimately it says, and so therefore we owe you $812. Thanks. But I don't know exactly how many books are sold, and I don't know. The only way, when I was talking to you about that I experienced, was that checks went from fairly decent size to smaller and smaller and smaller, and then they got decent sized again for a longer period of time. The movie carried it a little bit. And there's also a ranking on Amazon.com, and if you are ranked in the top 1,000 books or so, it means you're selling a few, which is okay. And there was a period of time when I was in those 300 to 500 ranks, never a bestseller. Although I can tell people that I'm a best-selling author because boxing biographies was #1 for a little while. So I was #1 selling boxing biography, way ahead of Roberto Duran. So I can kind of follow that and see that there's a little momentum behind it. But I honestly don't know exactly how many books have been sold, other than I know what my percentage is off the books, and I know what the total amount of money I made from it. And so when I say that nowadays, it might be close to 20,000 books from Irish Thunder. I think that might be about right. It could be between 15 and 20 in a way. But like I say, my assumption was that the books were being sold here in Lowell, because when I came and did a thing at the bookstore, when it was still there on Merrimack, right? I was with Micky, so that always helps. But there were 150 people there, 100 anyway, and we sold 80 books and stuff, and that was like one of the best nights and days I had. So Lowell's been very good.
I know you still work in broadcasting. What kind of led you in that direction? Did you go to school for that, or did you focus on writing in school?
I kind of fell into it, fortunately or unfortunately, but I was telling the kids today that, well, I didn't tell them this part. When I was in first grade, I stood up on the stage at Euphemia Hall for What Are You Going to Be When You Grow Up Day or whatever, and all the parents were there, and I said, I'm going to be Howard Cosell. I got a little bit of a laugh, which I didn't understand, because I didn't know Howard Cosell was a bit of a, a lightning rod. But I knew that I loved sports and that I loved to write, and I knew that he was going to, you know, all the best sporting events around the world, and I thought, well, that's a great career. And by third grade, Mrs. Nelson told me I was a very good writer and I should try to pursue this and everything. I said, okay, cool. So I got to high school. I did honors English as well as all the other English classes that were provided. I took typing so that I could type. And when I got to college, I took acting. I worked at the radio station. I worked at the TV station. And while I wanted to be a sports writer for a magazine, when I got to college, I was able to kind of play with all the toys in the radio and TV stations. And I thought, well, this is writing with toys. This is an opportunity to be more creative with music, sound, video. And I really liked it, but none of that would have happened if my parents didn't move to Cape Cod. And when I got out of college, there was a cable station that did a half-hour newscast every night, and I applied to be a cameraman for $4 an hour, and I got that job. And a year into it, I walked to my news director and said, you know, I'm making $4 an hour as a college grad. I need to kind of find a good paying job. I'm going to give you my 2 weeks notice and try to find a job maybe in advertising, because I'm a creative writer, and maybe something like that will happen in Boston. And he said, don't give your notice today because I'm giving mine today. And that's going to open up the reporting position, and I'm sure you'll get it. And so that day I became a reporter. A year later I was a news director, and my career started to take off from there. A very slow pace. It's not like I had any kind of meteoric rise. I worked at Channel 11 for a long time, Channel 58 also on the Cape for about 4 years. Providence was a nice big break from there. Worked at Channel 12 down there for 4 or 5 years. And then sometime in my early 30s I got to Fox 25. And so 3 years there, after which they did not renew my contract. So I don't like them so much. And nor should you. And I did 3 years in ESPN and 11 years now at Channel 5. But yeah, I mean, it's weird when I tell the story in my own mind that in first grade I wanted to be Howard Cosell, and then some very small version of that, because I'm in broadcast, sports broadcast. It happened, but along the way I really just wanted to write. And so to then get a broadcast job that was part-time, that afforded me the opportunity to write on the side, I was very excited about that. So this kind of stuff just kind of keeps me out of trouble and gets me out of the house, and I get to meet some nice people, and it's been a wonderful experience. I'm glad that I took that challenge on, and whatever level of success, I know that I didn't waste my time.
What are your sports assignments these days, Ron?
Well, I'm waiting to see the Red Sox in the World Series.
You'll cover that?
Yeah, I don't get to travel as much anymore, but most of the traveling is done by Mike Lynch, our primary sports guy. Really, in the past few years, when I call myself a news and sports anchor, they take the word anchor quite literally. I am anchored to the building. I don't get to Fenway Park like I used to. When I just did sports, I'd be at Fenway Park on a regular basis. Now I'm a news anchor. They can't send the sports me to Fenway because the news me needs to be in the studio for that stuff. So that's limited me a little bit, but yeah, right now I'm just waiting for the Bruins to get started and Patriots to start looking good despite their victories, and see how far the Red Sox can go. Yeah.
I'm curious about you making the switch from sports to crime.
Yeah, the odd story to that is simply that I started to try to write screenplays as well. A friend of mine in Rhode Island asked me if I had any ideas, and we started writing a couple of things, and we're just sort of enjoying ourselves. We talk and laugh and write stuff down and meet again. And when we tried to pitch them as best we could to either literary agents or studios and the small-time contacts that we had, we didn't have much success. So I ended up finding a literary agent in Boston, and he is friends with Steve's son. Is that right?
Who's that?
Matt,
My nephew.
his nephew.
They went
And
to college.
so Matt started working with Steve. Matt's working with me. Matt brings me and Steve together. That's correct too. He brought me and Steve together. And And you can tell them the truth, I was like their third choice. They went to a couple of other people
I didn't
who
have-
turned him down.
Yeah, Michelle McPhee,
Yep.
broadcaster, reporter.
But I took it on because I do the news as well, and I do follow the news, and I pay attention to those things. I've read Brothers Bulger and Hitman and things like that. And I just took it on as a new challenge. I said, okay, this will be interesting. I'll meet Steve and start to write this. And I'll go to the Bulger trial every day when they finally get that thing started. And that was a, entertaining, very engaging summer. It was frustrating to see nearly $3 million of your money just thrown away, though. That's what the defense ended up charging the state. And the defense didn't even put on a defense. They didn't even try to win their case. And I kept telling everybody, every lawyer I know, like Bosworth or whatever, I'd say, this Carney is not doing a good job. Oh no, he's brilliant, he's brilliant. I said, no, he's not even trying. And I finally got some validation or vindication when the trial ended and Carney stepped outside the courthouse and he said, this trial was never about making Whitey Bulger a free man. He knew the day he was arrested that he would die behind the walls of a prison or on a gurney with a needle in his arm intended to kill him. That's, I think, pretty much quote unquote what he had to say. This trial was about exposing the federal government and the corruption that allowed Bulger to do what he did. Because I tell you, the lawyer friends of mine, I'm like, his opening statement admitted to 23 felony counts. He didn't just admit that his client was guilty, he bragged about it. He was the head of an organized crime unit, and he made millions upon millions upon millions of dollars while doing it. And you said to go,
But he never killed a woman.
yeah, but they want to maintain that he didn't kill a woman, that he wasn't an informant, and that the government is corrupt. But why have a trial? And quite honestly, the prosecution did a lousy job as well. You got a Whitey Bulger right there, not even trying to defend himself, and he got off on 9 murders, is it? He found guilty on 11?
Yeah.
So 8 murders. I mean, it was entertaining, a lot of interesting stuff, and it's comes to life on the pages. But it was a frustrating period of time to watch one guy get up on the stand and tell his story about how Bulger put a gun in his mouth and ordered him to pay $200,000, and this is the prosecution putting their case up there. And then the defense would say, so, how you doing? Where are you from? You know, it was almost like a Vegas act, because they didn't ever ask any questions about the extortion that was just explained to the jury. So the jury could only think, well, that's true, let's move on, next witness. Day after day after day, same thing. And it was, it was just entertaining, but frustrating. I veered off on the impact statement for you, but, any other questions?
Can you tell us a little more about impact statement? What it's about? Because is it about that
Yeah.
kind of side story? Because I've never really heard that.
Yeah, let me just, this is the impact statement, what it looks like. And what it really is the story of Steve Davis and his family and their fight for justice. The background on it was that Debbie Davis dated Steve Flemmi for eight years or more and went missing in September of 1981. And the family was probably pretty convinced that she was dead and probably pretty convinced that Flemmi had something to do with it, but there was no body and no way of knowing. After indictments in 1998, and Martirano and Kevin Weeks started to tell stories to the federal government, bodies were discovered throughout the Quincy and Dorchester area. They found Debbie underneath the Neponset River Bridge, and that's when the family knew for sure that Debbie had been killed. And because Weeks was able to identify the location, and Flemmi had already pled guilty to participation in the murder, and we also knew from the Wolf hearings of 1998 that there was a lot of corruption in the Boston Bureau of the FBI, and so they had a lawsuit against the government, as many other victims' families did. in an effort to expose what that corruption was, because the government, the FBI guys in particular, John Connolly and John Morris, knew that Bulger and Flemmi were out there killing people, and allowed it to happen for various reasons. Because they allowed it to happen, a wrongful death suit was successful. So I was able to write the first 2/3 of the book about Steve's family, which has its wild side, fascinating upbringing, cruelty and tragedy and things like that, and then get into the trial against the government. And I'm about 2/3 of the way done as we open up with the Bulger trial itself, and the aspects of the Bulger trial that brought us back and related to Debbie's murder and things like that are the focus of the book. I don't get into all the detail and the expansiveness of the trial. It's everything sort of needs to come back to the story of this family and their reaction to things. And ultimately, there was a no finding on Debbie Davis's murder, which kind of leaves kind of an empty feeling in terms of no real closure. Probably justice has been served to the extent that both Bulger and Flemmi are going to be in jail forever, but there's no real closure, there's no real knowledge. And Steve and I, we fought from time to time as to what we think really happened. I'd say to him, like, why do you think that Bulger killed your sister? So Flemmi said, well, Flemmi, how can you trust him? Well, if he did it in that house, how do you know he did it in that house? I mean, we really only have Flemmi's version of this. Bulger never talked, and so there's reason to believe that a version of Flemmi's story is close to the truth, because it's essentially the same thing that happened to another girl named Deborah Hussey, and the jury did find guilty on that murder, which was surprising to me. I thought they'd kind of link the two female victims together, and that didn't happen. But it's to me, it was an interesting story of the family's fight for justice, and I tried not to make it about Whitey Bulger or Steve Flemmi. I think the two of them are as bad as it gets. And what I do hope, and I can say this in front of Steve, when I first started writing it, I wanted to find an individual that would bring some emotion to the story, as opposed to the legend of Whitey Bulger killing 19 nameless, faceless, nobody people and stuff like that. It was just the number 19. I go, wait a minute, there were humans involved. And so I wanted Debbie to kind of be that emotional connection and that sympathetic character. And without being corny, I think Steve became that character for me throughout the course of the book, because he really is Don Quixote fighting windmills throughout this whole thing, and battling against all odds and never giving up. And I tease him because when we started writing the book, I called him Everyday Steve, because he called me every day. And then it was sort of like a joke and a teasing, but then it became a real term of respect, because he was at that trial every day. And there were a couple of other family members there. A couple of the Donahues were there every day. But not everybody else, not the rest of his family, weren't there every day. And so I had a lot of respect for the fact that he persevered and pushed this through. And you see, again, like a Micky Ward type story, where against all odds, and his background is criminal and difficult and abusive in terms of how his father was and things like that. And yet, when it's all said and done, he's a man of character and fight and for the right and all the rest of that stuff. And so I hope, again, that I've told it in the book, as well as I hope I've just told it now in terms of what this really is about, because I think sometimes what it's really about can be lost in the machine gun fire and the intrigue of a body being discovered and the testimony and the curse words and things like that. It's like, there's a heart beating in the middle of an action movie. And so hopefully, you see some of that in the midst of this. And that's Impact Statement.
Did you just finish it?
Yes, the trial ended August 11th. And I was supposed to have 2 weeks after the trial to finish. And we thought the trial was going to run into mid-September, so I really thought I had until early October to finish the book. So it ends on August 11th, quite suddenly, and the publisher said, okay, you'll have it in 2 weeks. I go, yeah, I have it in 2 weeks, get off my back. And they, the afternoon of the verdict, they called and said, can you have it in 1 week? And I said, why? What's the major rush? I mean, we're going to be first out. And they said that BJ's is interested in it, and their dates for delivery or this and that. We need to have it done by X, Y, or Z. I was like, all right, fine. I guess you can have it in a week. But I thought I was lying to them at the moment. And then I got up the next morning at 6 o'clock and was writing for over 3 hours and making good progress. I was actually feeling pretty good. And the editor called and said, can you have it tomorrow? I said, no, I can't have it tomorrow. I really can't. I wish I could, but I can't. I actually finished it the next night, Wednesday night. And then Thursday morning, I got up and I wrote the introduction and the acknowledgments. And I sent it in Thursday noon, 1 o'clock or something like that. And so that was August 14th, I guess. And then I was in Washington, D.C., getting my kid off to college. He's at the University of Richmond, and we stopped in D.C., and I was writing the photo captions. There's 20 pictures in here and stuff like that, and they sent me the photos, and while I'm at the Jefferson Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial and stuff like that, I'm writing the photo captions into my phone and sending those back. So it all got done, and it just, yesterday I think was its launch date. It had several different launch dates and things like that. So it's in stores now, and then in 2 weeks it'll be available in Kindle and ebook editions and things like that. So I'm excited to have it out, and again to have another marathon completed. So I met Steve,
Can't stand
how long ago? But
it. Can't stand
it was about
it. Two separate counties.
it must have been a year ago when we sat down, and then I didn't do too much of anything until January, and then I did a lot until June, and then I waited for the trial to kind of play out, and then I did a lot in about a week and a half at the end of the trial to 3 days after.
I used to bring fish over to his house, man, to cook. It was brain food.
Yep, you bring it up, cook it. Any questions about anything? Television, news, books, sports, private life? Mind your own business. What's that?
I say, how do you write? Do you write, do you use like, what modern technology stuff? Do you do like voice recognition?
I thought that would be great, but no, I just sit on the computer, and the best thing about computers, in my opinion, is when I say that I put everything into different documents and folders. Okay, I'm going to write about the Leha fight now. Okay, I'm up to that part of the Micky book. All right, now I just word search Leha, 12 different documents come up. I open each one, cut and paste the Leha stuff into what I'm working on, and then cut and paste that in the order I think might work best. And now it's all laying out in front of me, and then I just make sentences out of it. And it can be relatively quick that way. So I have no idea how people used to write longhand or with quills. But I'm very pleased that the computer age came along so that I could actually get something accomplished. But you can still struggle sitting staring at the computer and really kind of like toiling with exactly what you want to say and trying to get it across in an original way. I mean, everything we say has been said before, hasn't it? And so when you're writing, you're trying to come up with a new way of talking and to make a point clear and to be interesting. It's like I've never heard it phrased that way. What did I say? I was writing something the other day, and not that this is genius or anything, but I said that this character had given up on hope. He thought he had come to believe that hope was despair's brother. Okay, I don't think you've ever said that before, and I don't know if it's any good, but I wrote it down. I go, good, I'm happy with that. Let's move on. So, but you have to think about that for a long time and decide whether or not it fits what you're trying to say. And so, knowing that the process is easier, that I can type like 90 words a minute, because I took typing in class and just like that, it makes it less intimidating to sit down knowing that if I got an idea, I'm not gonna lose that idea because I'm typing it out as I'm thinking it, as opposed to when you used to write it, and then by the time you get to the end, what was I saying? I don't even know, are there cookies? And so it's sort of like, so it's much easier